Good evening and welcome to Mystery. I'm Vincent Price. Tonight, Sherlock Holmes finds that the simplest cases very often become grotesque and chaotic. By 1908, Sir Arthur Conan Doyle had firmly decided never to write any more Sherlock Holmes stories. He'd been devastated by the death of his first wife and had returned to his quiet country home, vowing to pursue what he considered his primary work. Conan Doyle was much more interested in writing historical romances and conducting experiments in psychic phenomena than he was in creating any more adventures of Sherlock Holmes. But very soon, the Strand magazine convinced the author to submit 2 more Holmes tales, and he did. One is our story tonight, The Adventure of Wisteria Lodge. Conan Doyle originally titled this story A Reminiscence of Mr. Sherlock Holmes. Perhaps because it was written under somewhat nostalgic circumstances, the great detective seems to have mellowed a bit towards the interference of the local police. In the past, you'll recall, Holmes made no attempt to mask his disdain for foolish officers like the incompetent Inspector Lestrade. But tonight, we meet the cleverest of all the police inspectors to feature in the Holmes stories, Inspector Baines. Baines prefers to work independently of Holmes, hoping to claim all the glory for himself. Still, the great detective seems almost amused by the spunky investigator and maintains terms with him that are, well, agreeable. But tonight's mystery is not so agreeable. Torture, disappearance, and murder are just some of the elements that make up the adventure of Wisteria Lodge.
Hello, and welcome to the LBC Irregulars, a story-by-story review of the Jeremy Brett Sherlock Holmes series produced by Granada Television between 1984 and 1994. I'm your host, Kathy Bright. Joining me on this adventure through Sherlock Holmes is the Sherlock Holmes to my Irene Adler, Jarrod, the yard sale artist Albrecht. Good evening, Jarrod. How are you tonight?
Good evening, Kathleen. I'm well. As usual, I brought you a gift.
Yay, I like gifts.
All right, so you have your choice. Do you want your gift to be from episode 1 or episode 2 for today's discussion?
Okay, episode 2.
All right, in that case, I got you not 1, not 2, not even 3. I got you 7 plans for making your own submarine. They're supposed to be 10, but you got 7 out of 10.
Well, hey, I mean, I can work with 7, I guess.
That's almost half.
Yeah. a little bit more than that, but let's see. I decided to bring you not 1, not 2, maybe 20 mirrors. I figured you'd like to.
You picked up on that, did you?
Maybe just a little. We might be discussing that a little bit
FYI,
later.
if you had picked the other way, you would not get plans for a submarine. You would have got 1 of 2 dueling pistols, but you only would have got 1 of the set. So
the funny thing, those pistols aren't in the story. Those are just in the TV show.
Oh, really?
Did you reread it too, Mike?
I did.
Oh, everyone here's fancy but me.
I don't remember reading about them in the story. Did you remember it, or I just completely forgot?
I don't remember reading them in the story. I don't. Okay. Yeah, I don't know if they're in the story.
I was going to say, didn't I buy you a really nice Sherlock Holmes book that you could read?
I actually replaced I used to have it in 2 volumes, and you bought me the 1 volume, really nice looking one. And as I say on every episode, I've read all these, but I was like 13 or 14, and I haven't reread them since. So we're going off of fuzzy Jarrod memories when it comes to the literary Holmes.
Well, I guess since we've kind of already allowed our guest to speak a little bit, maybe we should possibly introduce him? Nah, just... All right. On this episode, as we continue our review of the 4th season of the Granada Sherlock Holmes series, which now we are at the final 2 episodes for this particular season, the final 2 regular episodes before we get to the movie-length episode, also known as The Hound of the Baskervilles. On this episode, we have invited our good friend writer, publisher, and podcaster extraordinaire, Michael Tiki Gordon.
Howdy.
Hello, Mike. How are you doing tonight?
I am great. Thank you for inviting me. This is great. I love the show, your show, and the Sherlock Holmes show. So great to be here.
Well, that's good to hear. I'm glad at least one person likes it.
I'm fair to middling on it.
A lot of people like the Granada show, so you're okay.
Well, I guess we got to do a show. So it's now time for Kathy to give us the recap on our first story. If you're not familiar with Wisteria Lodge, you might get your ending spoiled. And with that, I hand it over to Kathy, who will get this in one take with no problems.
A bored Sherlock Holmes and a relaxed John Watson are preparing for the arrival of Scott Eccles, who claims to have just had the most incredible and grotesque experience. Mr. Eccles comes rushing in with a wild story of how he spent the evening with a somewhat new acquaintance, Mr. Garcia, or Garcia, which is how we would all say it, only to awaken the next morning finding himself completely alone in the home. No Garcia, no staff, no one other than Mr. Eccles himself. Sherlock, Watson, and Eccles go to the home of Mr. Garcia to investigate. As they are inspecting for clues, they are joined by Inspector Baines and Constable Downing, who have followed Mr. Eccles to obtain a statement regarding the death of a Mr. Aloysius Garcia. Why was Mr. Eccles left alone during the evening? Is he responsible for Garcia's death? If not, who else could have wanted him dead? We might discuss all these questions, so keep listening if you want to find out.
Well, now it's time for some highs or lows or what does, where we each take a look at the good, the bad, the meh, whatever you're thinking. We've got 2 rounds of it. So in the first round, of course, we're going to start with our guest, which is our good buddy, Mike. Mike, are you going to start us off with a high, a low, or a what the?
I'm going to start us off. This is a high, although I think part of it is on the low end. So, but it's sort of a mixed bag, but mostly it's a high. And that is the introduction of Inspector Baines, played by Freddie Jones. I mean, I think he's the big star in this episode. So much so, here comes the low, so much so that I don't even think Sherlock's necessary for this story. In fact, you could argue that he doesn't really do anything that, like, if Sherlock's not in this, then pretty much everything just happens the way it happens. Like,
I hadn't thought of that. That's a good point.
I don't think he needs to be here. Baines has got this covered. He's got it. Like, he knows what's going on. He knows the score. He's had his eye on this guy in this mansion. He knows what's going on. He knows that Eccles didn't do anything. This is not one of the best stories, in my opinion. It's another one of damn foreigners story, as I like to call them, because there's quite a few of those, I think, if you'll notice, for that Doyle wrote. I think you've covered a few of them, whether it's Greeks or Spaniards or whoever's coming in, like, causing problems, foreigner on foreigner violence, and Sherlock gets in the middle of it somehow and straightens it all out. Or it did really help to reread the story for this one, because there's a lot of things that are not really answered. What Eccles goes through, why Garcia puts up with it, his whole plan of assassination, like, it's just terrible. It's terrible. I mean, we can get into that as a low, but really, that I don't want to take anything away from. Very rarely do we get such competency from another character, let alone a fellow police officer in this series. I mean, some of them do all right for themselves, but really, it's almost like, if I didn't know better, I'd think that Doyle was writing a spin-off. Like, oh, I'm going to do a new series, and it's going to be Inspector Baines mysteries and all that. And because he's really, like, solid. And Freddie Jones, who's done a lot of other work, he just plays him really well, takes over the screen, and he's just great. You could even watch this without Holmes in this. That's how good I think he is.
Had Holmes not been there, it would have been devastating to the bike rental business in this area.
That's true. And Watson does save Miss Burnett. I mean, he's there to catch her anyway when she falls. So out of the cabin. So you could argue that Miss Burnett maybe doesn't survive this if he's not there. So maybe props for Watson. But Holmes, really, even he has to admit, you're a credit to your profession, Inspector Baines. So
my favorite part about that is Baines is like, some of us, out here in the country, you got to make our name for ourselves. I'm like, Baines, you are 65 years old, man.
He's a little long in the tooth for that.
Late for this, brother.
Yeah, not a lot happens though. So he's like going jumping on this. He's like, I have my chance at getting a international evil man figure here. Like, that's I am not letting this go.
Freaking damn foreigners.
Yeah. But I was going to say the counterpart, and I do not disagree. I agree with everything that Mike said. Is there are moments when I think Sherlock is aware of everything Baines is aware of, but because Baines has that conversation with him, and I'm not sure why, because this is not typical Sherlock, I feel like he lets him go with it. He's not, we've been talking about the changes that Sherlock's kind of gone through, and in this episode, he's not as boisterous. No, this is a Sherlock show. He's kind of, okay, go for it. I'm going to let you do this.
Yeah, it's also, he and Watson quite rightly think that Baines is arresting the wrong man on purpose, and he's going down this road that they've seen hundreds of times before. Yeah, they're going to arrest the wrong guy. This is another incompetent cop that we're dealing with, et cetera, et cetera. But even from the very beginning, I love the way that Sherlock watches, or, is just him in meeting when they're in the actual Wisteria Lodge together. And they're going over their shared clues and they're trying to kind of one-up each other a little bit. But I think Sherlock is really amused that this guy is kind of on it, and he has done pretty well for himself. There's that great line after Baines talks about the paper of which the note was written on. Sherlock gives him a couple of other clues, and I think Baines says something to the effect of, I thought I'd squeezed it all, but apparently there was still some juice there.
Now, I will say that also in relationship, because, there's so much discussion about Baines right now. On our last episode, I brought up Gregson, who is the character that is in the Elementary series. Well, in this story, Gregson is the inspector who is on scene. It's not Baines. So you mentioned that
Granada's just lying to me left and right.
It is a little bit.
No. I think Baines is in this story.
Well, it is, but he's the one. It's Gregson and Baines.
Yes,
not Baines and a Constable Downing,
right,
or whatever his
name is. Exactly. You're right. It's Baines and some. Yeah, it's because they show up when Eccles is at 221 Baker Street. Gregson and Baines show up. They want to not arrest him, but they're looking for Eccles right there. So
right. And
there's some things that are different. Yeah,
and that's what I've mentioned before. That's one reason I love reading and watching these episodes is because they are so true. Like, I will highlight while I'm watching the episode the exact wording. 75% of this story is in that 1 hour episode.
Yeah, absolutely.
But it's just the order of things. Like he was saying in the book, the police officers show up at 221B, not at the house. So, the order is a little bit different, but that's just for storytelling purposes.
Well, the main thing we've got to do is check in with Kathy on her usual Watson watch. So, Kathy, what do you got for us this time?
Kind of neither of these episodes are my favorite jovial Watson. I feel like they're both kind of a subdued, just a normal everyday Watson. But I will say that smoking jacket that he's wearing at the beginning of this episode, that smoking jacket is fire. It's so good. I love it. That was good. That was possibly going to be your other gift.
I almost got a smoking jacket. All right. We've talked a lot about, as Mike said, the star of the show is kind of Baines and the sort of dueling banjos that he and Holmes do, and it's fun to watch. And I just want to talk about Eccleston for a minute. This guy cracks me up, man. He's like, I don't know how it goes in the book. I can't remember, but he's like, I'm going to go to this dude's house and we're going to spend the night talking about maps, And I was like, okay, I guess that was exciting back then. Like this dude, and then he's he wakes up. He's like, "Can I get hot water? I need a servant." I was like, how do you function when there's no one else around? Like, I guess he's a wealthy guy or something. I'm like, you have no idea how to function. Can't find anybody. But I get it was weird to wake up and just everybody's gone. I get that.
And I think they had only met like one time, right?
Yeah, it was just a weird set. I was like, this is a weird setup. But I was like, maybe it's the 1800s and they didn't have cable TV or anything. So they just, let's go talk about
I don't know. I'm such a nerd. I'm like, oh yeah, I know. He's like, he's telling Sherlock that he's really like, he's a bachelor and he's really social and he goes to parties and you're like, yeah, you're just that guy.
Yeah. I got that feeling too. I was like, you're that guy.
And they don't really explain. That's the other reason to read the story, because they don't really explain why Garcia needs Eccles, because he needs an alibi. And so he's just using him. It's not really clear in the episode that he's just using him because he needs an alibi. That's why he comes in and says, "Oh, I'm sorry to bother you. It must be 1 a.m. I'm sorry. I'll put you back to sleep," because he needs an alibi.
Right.
He doesn't know he's going to end up dead. Right.
Yeah,
so
he wanted him to know what time it was. Well, I did have another quick question about the story. I might have just missed this part. Did they mention that they were cartographers in the story?
I don't recall that, to be honest with you. It's possible, but
I don't think they did. I think that was another addition to the TV series, which actually I think works because it shows a little more of why he would agree to go to this man's house, that they did have something in common.
And the sequence later on where Sherlock and Watson are pretending to be cartographers exploring is not in the book either, is not in the story either. So it kind of bolts on that. But back to Jared, back to Eccles. He is quite the character, a nerdy guy. What tickles me about him is that he shows up at Sherlock's house and Sherlock goes, "Okay, I got 2 questions for you. 1, why are you here? And 2, why did you wait so long?" And basically he's saying, "Why didn't you clean yourself up?" Because at one point, I think Eccles said something like, "Oh, I'm sorry. I never give a thought to my toilet," and I'm just like,
I totally had to look that up. I was like, what are they talking about?
And I'm like, and you notice he's sitting on the couch and Watson's giving him a wide berth on the couch. I'm like, this guy has not showered. He's been running all over the village, checking on this guy. Like, he must reek.
He didn't get his hot water. There was nobody to fetch his hot water for him.
Yeah. So, and then he kind of disappears. Like, he's in the first part of this story and then he's gone.
Well, I've been sitting on this joke for a while. You guys said that the cartographer thing was made up for the show. So that's just something they mapped out on the spot. Okay. I got that one out.
Nice.
Anything else from you, Mike? Burning thoughts about this episode as we do our second and final round.
I do give the storyline credit because Henderson, a.k.a. Don Murillo, is really cast well and really is imposing. Like, the director makes him look like he is a force to be reckoned with. I love the fact, like, when he does meet up with Holmes and Watson, he's like, "I will meet them." And then he goes into his little private room, like, looks like a throne with the lights on. I was going to say his
throne room.
with his own, like, stage lighting and everything. Like, he just looks as imposing and evil as he possibly can. But it works. I love that part of it. But the idea, like, the resistance against him, I understand why he's not threatened by them at all, because they really are incompetent. I mean, at one point, the woman who's the nursemaid, Miss Burnett, she's like, "I will give my life for the cause." They kind of stick her with something. And she's like, "Garcia, and he's right next door." Like, she gives him up at the minute. Like,
she spilled the beans so fast.
So fast. And Garcia goes to assassinate him. He doesn't take his 2 buds with him. Nope. He just goes by himself, gets knocked on the head with a bag of sand and then beaten to death while his 2 friends are like, what are they doing? Like, it's really, really an incompetent plot to get this guy. I mean, they do get him at the end, which is kind of cool. It's one of those where, I mean, Sherlock's not responsible, so he's out of it. But I mean, I think during this time, too, we're seeing that Sherlock is allowing things to happen and crooks to get away with things. And he's kind of deciding he's like judge and jury, like he's letting people do things and working outside the law a little bit more. And actually, I think both these stories, him and Watson do illegal things. Yeah, so it is kind of interesting from that perspective. But yeah, I did like, he doesn't really do much, but I did like the presence of the bad guy and then the way he was casted.
That guy looks a lot like my father-in-law, who's Puerto Rican. He's a Puerto Rican gentleman, and he's got that mustache, and he has a very stern look about him. And
does he have the lighting in the chair?
He does. He's got a very imposing force, which made me laugh when he was like, "What's this guy's name? Henderson." Yeah, you look like a Henderson. Come on, man. At least pick a fake Hispanic name. Come on.
Like Salvador or something.
Like you went with Henderson, bro.
Exactly.
You do not look like a Henderson.
Who's the Lord of this manor? It is Senor Anderson.
No, and I will give the girl credit because in the story it says that she was tortured and all that for like 5 days. So it wasn't like
she gave it up in about
the first 30 minutes.
She did, man. I was like, man, it didn't take anything. I mean, granted, if I was being poked in the eye or the throat or whatever, I would do it too. I'm not saying that but I wouldn't go and say like, I will die for my cause right before that. I mean, I'd just be like, as soon as they caught me, I'd be like, all right, here's everything.
Here's the deal.
Exactly.
In other words, don't give Mike any of your secrets, folks.
Yeah, exactly. I'm like, give me the bag of sand. I'll go get him. I'll just knock him.
Yeah, I know right where he's at.
And, I will say I was quite shocked. That was quite the violent death in this show. I don't think we've seen anything that violent before.
Yeah, it was pretty brutal.
Anything else, Kathy? While you've got the mic for the second and final round, preying on your brain?
Yes. Let's discuss the visual aspect of this show.
You want to reflect on that?
Dang it. I don't mind. Jared's talked before. He tends to shy more away from the artsy episodes. This was 100% an artsy episode. But I never understood. I didn't hate it. It was very prominent, probably more so because it distracted me from the story, because that's all I was noticing. But I don't understand how it relates to the story at all. I'm like sitting here the whole time. I'm like, is there some clue I'm supposed to be picking up on why every single scene had a mirror and a reflection, if not once, 2, 3 times in every single scene?
I got a small theory. I have 2 small theories. One small theory is they knew this wasn't the zippiest of all the episodes. They tried to church it up with a little artsiness. Oh, and by the way, there's some much more artsy ones to come. This is mild.
Seriously?
Yeah, there's a couple that are just like fever dreams coming down the pipe. But anyway,
this seems to be the worst one so far.
I thought maybe they were toying around with reflections of self, where Holmes sees himself in Baines, and Garcia and Henderson are kind of reflections on each other. They're on the opposite side of the revolution that happened in this other country. And with just small tweaks, the one could be the other, easily. And that's I took an English class in college explanation.
I'm sure director Peter Hammond would thank you immensely for trying to explain away his overindulgence.
Peter Hammond's like, yep, that's it. He's got it.
Because that's not easy to do.
No, not at all. To avoid
back, you've got to really be careful where you put the camera, the crew, and everything, because one little slip and you're going to be able to see a guy with a boom mic. You're going to be able to see the director on the other side. You're going to be able to see things that are not so. And every single one, and you're right, Kathy, it's used a lot here, too much, because it is distracting. Very. And I know the story is not the greatest, but just putting mirrors everywhere or reflecting sources, because sometimes it's not a mirror, but it's more like something else that's reflecting. But
I think in the very first scene at the train station, they were reflecting in the gas lamp.
It just, it was too much. I do agree it was too much. And I'm like you, I don't see that happen a lot on this show.
Well, my final thing, unfortunately, is going to be a little bit of a low too, or maybe more of a what though, because I kind of laughed out loud because like Watson's doing his little recon on the house, right? And this is a veteran soldier, okay? And he gets waylaid by 2 little girls. He gets surprised by them, and B, he gets drug into the house by them. I'm like, what army did you serve in, sir? Because
technically he left because he was injured.
That is unacceptable soldier-like behavior. And I get that he was a medic and all that, but I'm like, that's Soldiering 101 to know what's going on around you.
I have not ever had or been in the presence of two young girls like that. So, but I can understand from people who I know who have that they are quite tenacious and they can be more than a handful for the most grizzled of warriors.
I guess so. I guess I'm not so hung up on him dragging him inside because it could be sort of a playful thing. But the whole thing, he got snuck up on. I'm like, what?
He does refer to them later as goblins, which I think is fun.
Yes. Anyway, that's all I've got. Any more discussion, or is it time to score?
Was it me, or did they actually try to catch a cab on foot? Did they like chase after it while they were?
They chased after it, but they were chasing. They were trying to run to where their bikes were.
Okay.
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Yeah. They were trying to run to where their bikes were. Yeah. So I caught that too, and I'm like, the one place there aren't reflections is on the coach, and I'm like, can't they see them back there? Hey, there's these two guys running behind us.
I will say
we're gaining distance on them, though.
Back to the attention to detail from the story to the episode. The very first moment of Sherlock, like they describe him posed up like that so perfectly, and they did it so well in the episode. That's why Jarrod, you really would enjoy reading the stories again.
Rereading, yes, right. Rereading,
right. Because for me, these are a first read. I've always wanted to read them, but I just never have because I've had all the visual Sherlock Holmes. So this is giving me the chance.
I read them. I read a couple over the years, but a few years ago during the lockdown, during the pandemic, I made it a point to decide to read each one. And as I read it, I then watched the Grenada adaptation. So it was enhanced that way. And frequently now I will, like for this, in order to prep for this show, I watched the 2 episodes. I read the two stories, and then I watched the episodes again. It is amazing to me how authentic and faithful they are, because some of the lines of dialogue are they're right out of the story.
Oh, like I said, I mean, I go through and watch them as I'm looking at the story, and I'm like, I'm pausing and I'm like, yep, he said that, and that. And there's paragraphs and paragraphs of these. And it may be a different person saying the line. Sometimes they intermingle the Watson and Sherlock lines and who says what. But all right, Jarrod, you got anything else?
No, it's over to you for scores. And here's Kathy to lead the discussion on the scoring.
So overall, what did we think of this episode? Guess what? We just happen to have a system in place that helps us rate each episode. On a scale of 1 to 5 pipes, 5, you loved it. It solved your mystery.
Aha!
4, it was really good. 3, it was all right. 2, you did not like it. And 1, you hated it. It threw you off of Reichenbach Falls. How would you rate this story? Mike, let's start with you.
I am going to give it a ranking of 3 grotesque pipes. I think it's all right. It's not the best by any means, but watching this a couple times, I still found there was enough to like, especially the performance of Freddie Jones and the reaction to Holmes having someone to compete against, kind of, sort of, but also appreciating. I did like that element of it. I think the story was better. Heck, the villain was cast really well. If he had more to do, it would have been really kind of cool too. So there's potential there. It's not a total washout, but it's all right. It's not very grotesque either.
I will completely agree with that assessment. I was planning on giving this a 3 as well. I did not hate the artsiness of the episode. I just think it was overused. The story wasn't awful, but like you said, had potential, could have been better. It was just kind of middle of the road episode for me. Jarrod, what about you?
Complete agreement. I'm at a 3. I thought it was fine. Artsiness didn't bother me too much or anything like that. Just not the most exciting story, but the Granada folks always find a way to make it come together, which I think is like very much what Mike was saying. But wait, there's more. Here's Kathy to give us a recap on our second episode, The Bruce Partington Plans. Once again, if you're not familiar with the story, you might get the ending spoiled.
But wait, before I read the synopsis, let's listen to Vincent Price introduce our next episode, The Bruce Partington Plans.
By the way, I love the fact that you guys include the Vincent Price stuff. That's how I was introduced to the series.
Oh, I'm so glad you said that.
And I love Vincent Price, and just to hear those, I mean, that's just you guys are great for including those.
I'm really glad you said that, because every time I do, I was like, do people even listen to this part?
Yes.
Okay, good.
If nothing else, I'll listen to that.
Credit where credit's due. The show started with Gene Hendricks, and that was Gene's idea. I was unaware of it. I'd never seen it on Mystery, and Gene was like, hey, I wonder if we could get the Vincent Prices. And once he told me that, I went and found them. And I found them.
I'm glad they have them all still.
Yeah, that's very cool.
Good evening, I'm Vincent Price. Tonight on Mystery, Sherlock Holmes delves into the world of international espionage as he tries to solve the adventure of the Bruce Partington plans. It's not so unusual that Holmes should be involved with spies, for his creator, Sir Arthur Conan Doyle, perfected several espionage techniques for the British government. During World War I, Conan Doyle was able to sneak information to British prisoners in Germany by sending them books in which he'd put pinpricks beneath various letters to spell out messages. He always began in the book's third chapter, however, because he believed that German censors would probably examine the earlier chapters more carefully. One of Holmes's most devoted fans was the real-life spy familiar to audiences here on Mystery, Sidney Riley. Riley admired the great detective's ingenuity and his ability to size up a situation completely, two qualities which Holmes brings to bear in tonight's story. It's a most unusual case, which, as Holmes's brother Mycroft tells him, offers the greatest chance in his career to serve his country. The adventure of the Bruce Partington plans.
One foggy London day, a restless Sherlock is enjoying his own vocal talents while Watson relaxes with his newspaper. The day turns exciting when they learn that Mycroft Holmes will be making an unexpected visit. Before Mycroft arrives, Sherlock has already pieced together that the body of a government employee found dead on the local train tracks is quite obviously related to Mycroft's visit. Mycroft comes to ask for his brother's expert help in finding 3 missing pages of stolen confidential papers found with the body of Cadogan West. Sherlock quickly agrees to help. Did Cadogan steal the papers to sell for profit? How did he end up dead on the train tracks? Keep listening while we all find out the answers together.
Well done, Kathy. Now it's time for our highs and lows and what those, where we'll take a look at the good, the bad, and the meh of each episode. And in round 1, once again, we start with Mike.
Well, once again, I have to point to the fact that we have a amazing guest star in this episode. And in this case, it is Charles Gray as Mycroft, his second appearance, I believe, in the Granada series. I find it interesting because he was there in the first season for, I believe it was The Greek Interpreter. And so we haven't seen him since then. And Sherlock sort of reintroduces Watson to him. And I think it's for, obviously viewers who are trying to, to catch them up and everything. But it is kind of funny because it's a different Watson. So it's almost like, oh, yes, my brother, the guy who works in, and all that sort of thing.
The other doctor that lived here before you met him.
and maybe that's why they had Mycroft pause. He was like, Dr.
Yeah, exactly. That's the other thing I love about it is that with Mycroft, it's a little sort of an in-joke too, because when Mycroft comes in, he's like, Doctor, like, I don't know you. He's like, Watson. I was like, Okay.
Guy who forgets nothing, by the way.
Exactly. He's like, whatever. I find that I think he's in 4 total of these stories, and he's just great. It's great casting. Charles Gray is just wonderfully pulls it off. He's always like, snoozing, and he's totally perfect Mycroft. Just like Jeremy Brett is the perfect Sherlock, Charles Gray is the perfect Mycroft here. And this is a story that is definitely worthy of Mycroft. Just like sort of the last one I said was one of those damn foreigner stories that Doyle does. This one is the plans are missing story. Like, because we have the naval treaty as well as the second stain, which I think you guys just did, which are very similar to this. My question is, what's with British security being so loose and these things just getting away all the time? And B, how is Watson able to write about these stories and publish these things at all?
Ooh, that's a good point. That's a very good point.
Yeah. In one of the stories, I think the second stain, he actually has a big preamble saying, like, I got cleared to write this and publish it so that it's because everything is, but in this story, it's like, it's not something you really want the public to know. But I think the stories, each one of those, I do get them confused with one another sometimes, but I think they're all solid because they all bring something different. And I like this story a lot because the person that did it, or they think did it, is actually been misinterpreted as what he was doing. And so I like that. There's a lot of detection that Sherlock and Mycroft have to do a little bit. I like this story a lot.
All right. I completely agree with Mike. Always a bright spot when Charles Gray shows up as Mycroft. Anybody who's Blofeld is good in my book. And
It's true. It's true. That's right. That's right.
He's actually in 2 Bond movies.
The Venn diagram on Charles Gray, Not to mention he's also the one that introduces it all to the time warp. That's got to be some kind of he's got to be solely in that position of one of the rare breeds to cross over like that.
Yep.
Him and Christopher Lee.
Yep. Yeah, he also was in You Only Live Twice as a character named Henderson. But I always and he was Henderson.
Have I heard that name before? Was he playing a Spaniard?
Yeah, he was a Hispanic dude. No, but I always crack up because he shows up and I swear I'm like, what is this? His 20-year older brother, right? But those 2 guys are literally only 5 years apart, by the way, in real life. And I was
seriously?
He just looks a lot older than Sherlock.
Well, one of them obviously doesn't take care of himself as much. I mean, it's pretty, come on.
but shockingly, it's the one who looks younger.
That's not Mycroft shame.
But just like Mike said, though, I really do like this story. It appeals to me because I've, had a classified job in the military, and it's interesting to me how many things from the 1800s still are done in classified, we call them skiffs, a classified facility in the military, and how you protect documents and stuff. There's some similarities. I'm like, wow, so it appeals to me in that regard. And I think not too long ago, we did this same story. Kathy, you might have been on that episode for the Sherlock Holmes radio. We did Bruce Partington plans from the 1940s with Rathbone and Bruce. Maybe I'm wrong of whether or not you were on that one, Kathy, but I think we covered it. And it's just kind of neat to hear it condensed into a 20, 25-minute radio show and to see it expanded here. One of my favorite things about the radio show is to kind of spice it up and give it more energy. When they go check out the body on the tracks, they're going through the tunnel and a train's coming, it's about to run them over. And they're running and trying to outrun the train and all this. And then that's where the train moves on a different track so it doesn't run them over. And I think that's when Sherlock realizes that shift in track is what tosses the body off. But
points. The points, yes. This one is a lot of fun to watch him go through and link to link of what happens. And I think it's particularly well acted. I think the standout performance, and Mike's much better with remembering these actors' names. The dude who, stole them, the brother of the guy who worked there. I don't remember that actor's name. I thought he was particularly good. He played it real well. And I genuinely, when he was like, no, I didn't kill anybody, he was believable because he didn't kill it. Dude was just out for the money and everything just went so, his brother died because of this, right? And he was
I think he played that well. So there's plenty more to like in this, but I need to save some more stuff for Mike, Kathy, for the upcoming rounds. Kathy, does your go on round one?
Like I said earlier, I really don't necessarily have a Watson watch in this because he's not jovial Watson, and that's my favorite Watson. So I'm just going to say that my high for this episode is Mike, mentioned the other ones that are kind of like theft of confidential papers, that sort of thing. The second stain was the only one that I kind of gave a lower score to. I really enjoyed the naval treaty, and I really enjoy, even though this is a simple story, I like the way they told this one better. I think visually this is a better put together episode. I made a note about how, especially when they were in the house doing the investigating where they find the actual crime scene, the silhouettes that they use, and when he's on the train track and you get the Sherlock silhouette, I just think it was more visually appealing episode. But I like the story too. It was, even though it was a simple concept, I liked the use of the train. I like, was he on the train or was he in the train? And the house happens to be over where the train stops every day. I just thought that was all very interesting. That was definitely a high for me on this episode.
Does kind of come together, like it dominoes really well. I think you're right. I think it does.
If I may throw out a great Watson moment.
Go for it. Yes.
There is that moment. I love this scene. They're in the restaurant. Sherlock has asked Watson to meet him. And Sherlock says, okay, we're going to break into to Oberstein's place. And Watson is very uncomfortable with this. He's like, I don't know, Holmes. This seems to be like over. I'm really paraphrasing all of this awfully, but he says, like, don't really think this is good. Sherlock's like, you don't have to go in. I'll go in. Just wait outside and, watch for me or whatever. If you just, and he's like, I don't know. And then he pauses and then he just gives him that smile. And Sherlock goes, I knew it.
He jumps up from the table. He knew he had him.
Yeah, he's like, let's go.
He knew from the moment. He knew Watson was going with him.
He did. That's why, Watson kind of threw him. And Watson doesn't get a chance to do that very often. And because usually it's Holmes that's the playful one, right? But this time, I think it was Watson kind of taking the piss out of him a little bit. And I thought that was pretty fun.
Yeah. And we've mentioned that before of how, Watson always does that. He is literally his ride or die. He hardly ever says no at the beginning. This time he did, but like you said, maybe to kind of play with Holmes a little bit.
I'll toss it as small Watson that I liked too was when he takes the young lady home and he comes back to get Holmes and Holmes is like, Watson, he's like, see him in the bushes. And Watson's like, what the, and he's like, check it out. Broken stems can see through the crack. And Watson's like, okay. I don't even know if he's trying to put it together. He's just like, no, sure. That kind of cracked me up. Anyway, it's back to the top of the order anyway, Mike. So what else you got on your mind?
I like the fact that this is really, really Sherlock deep geek for me. Like, this is about as deep as I go. I don't claim to be an expert or anything like that, but there are things that I really, really appreciate. And one of the things that I love, because it happens in the story as well as it happens in this, is that Sherlock asks Mycroft for a list of agents that could be recipients of these plans should they become available. And he gets a list of 3 names. And I'm like, wow, that sounds familiar. And, the 3 names are Hugo Oberstein, who we see is actually the culprit, the guy. Also, Adolphe Mayer and another name, La Rothier, I think is his name. It's French, so forgive me on that. I was like, man, that seems really familiar. So I went back and checked, and sure enough, in the second stain, Sherlock says there are 3 people who might be candidates for getting this information. I'll need to check. One of them is Eduardo Lucas, who is murdered in that story. The other is La Rothier, who's mentioned in this one, and Oberstein, who's mentioned in this one. And I'm looking, and that's in the storyline as well as in the series episode. And I'm like, look at Doyle, because the stories are written, years apart, I think. He's got this consistency. Now, there's other times where Doyle's just right off the rails and he's putting in names and events that are no stories or whatever. I think actually in Wisteria Lodge, at the beginning of it, Sherlock Holmes says he's bored because, we have no one to challenge us since we put away Colonel Carruthers. And I checked, and there's no Colonel Carruthers in any story.
I'm so glad you did that because I kept thinking, I'm like, that sounds familiar, but I did not go back and look.
There is a Carruthers in The Solitary Cyclist, but it's not a Colonel Carruthers, and it's not an evil guy that they just put away like a Moriarty kind of figure. So,
gotcha.
What is also interesting, too, is that on both of these lists that are in these episodes, one name that is not mentioned, and this is foreshadowing maybe possible spoilers for an upcoming episode, is Charles Augustus Milverton, who we will find out very soon is known as the master blackmailer. So I find it interesting that he's not on anybody's list at this point, but I love that Doyle puts this stuff in. And for geeks like me, Sherlock geeks, I do this with other stories too, whether it's Star Trek or comic books or, whatever. I just love little touches like that where you can go back and look. And yes, Oberstein's in this one, and he's mentioned in like 10 stories from, before this. And it's just that sort of attention to detail is really fun.
You are an Easter egg connoisseur.
I like that stuff, especially when it's consistent and it shows that the author is not just kind of playing it by numbers and just putting in the bare minimum. It looks like they have a plan and that they're going to, or that they'll at least, when this one came up, it's like, man, I just had that list and let's see, like, oh yeah, that guy that I mentioned in this one, let me put him in this story. Like it shows that the universe is bigger than just what we're seeing.
I like to think that like come over to England and they're going through like customs and they're like, what's your business? And you're like, oh, I broker information internationally. Oh, good. Thanks for registering. And so that's why they have this consistent registry of these dudes, like
where they live.
Yeah. What do you do? I'm kind of a saboteur, really. Okay. Thanks for registering.
Exactly. Saboteur, blackmail. Do you deal with plans? Do you deal with blackmail material?
What about like saucy letters?
Yeah, exactly. Like no. That's what you need. Lucas for the saucy letters department.
Lucas on saucy letters.
Yeah.
Yeah,
I'm more of a military plans kind of guy.
Specialization.
Well, that is an awesome point. And to be honest with you, Mike, when he said Colonel Carruthers, the one that leapt into my mind, which was clearly incorrect, was I think it was after they kind of took care of the Moriarty thing. There was this other dude he was like staked out across the way with a sniper rifle.
Oh, right.
He was like Moriarty's second or something like that. And I thought, was that him? But clearly it wasn't because you've done the research.
I mean, it could be. I'm not an expert. Tried to do as much, a little bit of research as I could. I have the Doyle stories all digitally. So I just, search for Carruthers, and it's like where it pops up. So that's about as much research as I've done.
Hey, you did better than us. So good job. Good job. All right. I guess it's my turn. What was it? I had something. Give me a second. I got to remember. We got all caught up in our great discussion. I guess
I'm just waiting for you to tell me about the valves.
Oh, the valve. Well, yeah, that's complicated work right there. I couldn't tell you about all that, but
don't you love that when Sherlock's like, how did you know that, Sherlock? He's like, I become an expert on submarines.
Like, I checked out the plant, Yeah.
No, what was so funny? The plans were exposed. The guy covers them up, so it's like, oh no, he's not supposed to see these. And Sherlock just asks, "Let me see these," and the guy just rolls them back up and shows them. I'm like, what kind of security is this?
Well, I feel like the guy, this is my explanation for that. I think the guy, sort of out of muscle memory, there's someone here who's not normally here, hide them. But then I think he was reminded that I'm sure he got a call or a telegram that said, this guy's coming. Yeah. Full access.
Right.
Full access.
Yeah.
So it's kind of a muscle memory.
Mycroft.
Yeah, exactly. But no, you helped jog my memory about what I want to talk about. And it's, if you pay really close attention in this one, or maybe not so much, I don't know. I feel like if you pay close attention, you'll notice that how Holmes and Watson, when they're interviewing people, Holmes always wants the most efficient interview, right? And he kind of gets it with the guy with the plans, because the guy with the plans is very matter of fact, answers the question. He's a little bit cagey because he's
really defensive,
very defensive, but it kind of goes relatively well because Holmes, he's not a people person. So I don't think that guy's caginess bothers him one bit. But who was a people person? The guy at the railroad station pouring him coffee, trying to tell him stories. And even Watson got the vibe like, we have got to get the hell out. This guy's going to talk all day if we don't get the hell out of here.
So much so that he picked up the phone. I'm like, who's he calling? As soon as they left, he picked up the phone.
Yeah, I thought that was a neat misdirection to kind of make you think that he's part of it. He picks up the phone and they do nothing with that.
He's just like looking for someone else to talk to.
Maybe he probably want to call his wife and be like, hey, Sherlock Holmes is here. It's kind of cool.
I got to meet Sherlock Holmes today.
But yeah, that was what I want to talk about, is how they talk to people, deal with different personalities. I think it's so interesting. It speaks so much of Holmes's personality that the guy who's cagey, borderline rude, doesn't bother Holmes one bit, because Holmes is kind of cagey, borderline rude. Think about it. But as soon as a loquacious guy got going, like I said, even Watson has been Holmes's friend long enough to go, yeah, we got to get out of here.
When he interviews the fiance, it's completely different tone too.
Yes, exactly. Every interview has a different tone, and I like that about this episode. Also, Kathy, I considered for your gift at the beginning of the episode was going to be a nice new scarf, but I had accidentally dropped it onto the top of the train car.
I thought you were going to say it's going to be 2 unused tickets to a Broadway show or a West End show.
It's kind of neat too, and I hope I'm not stepping on anybody's toes, but you mentioned that it's kind of neat too that the guy that they initially suspected as this traitor and thief is just so ate up with his patriotism. The moment he sees something that doesn't seem right, he drops his girl and runs off into the night to be a superhero. He probably should have made a couple phone calls, but whatever.
Because that wouldn't have taken like 20 minutes.
Right?
And his death was actually a little bit different in the story as well. Because in the story, the guy, I think, like hits him over the head with a cane or something. But in the TV episode, it says he hit his head on the
yeah, it was almost like accidental.
Mm-hmm.
Like, I don't know that anybody legitimately tried to. They might have murdered him eventually, but it all went. Yeah, it was weird.
Well, they were beating him pretty good, and then they said he hit his head on the marble floor, and that was it.
Kathy, second and final.
It's not really a low. I guess I'm just a little disappointed at Sherlock for taking a couple of steps back in the rude department. The way he treated Miss Hudson.
Yes. Disappear.
And it's like, she's like, I love that she snapped back. I've only got 2 hands.
The little mannerisms he does.
Yeah. He was like, actually, the fact that he doesn't even tell her anything. He just looks at her like, you should know to get this out of my way.
But I did want to say, I've mentioned this before. I love Jeremy Brett, but y'all all know sometimes his mannerisms just really just get to me. I understand, but some of his moves are just not normal. I think this was the one where it might have been when he was sitting at the table and he like threw his hands up in the air and then rested one on his head while the other was still. I'm like, that is so not natural for anybody to do. What is this weirdness? But, it's part of his quirkiness. I do have a quick question, though. Is that the picture that's above their fireplace? Is that Reichenbach Falls? And I've just never noticed it.
No. I've been interested in that, too. And I just read the making of book, and they talk about how it was kind of an in-joke that they would put a framed picture of some waterfalls over the fireplace. And that's there from the first season, the very first episode on. So
okay, I guess I've just never noticed.
It's like foreshadowing, but then it's also kind of reflecting back on that incident. But yeah, they just thought it was a funny joke to put in, which I don't think they specify which falls it is. So it could be, but it's not in relation to the event because it's actually there before.
Gotcha. Okay. This is the time when go ahead. No, go ahead. I
was gonna make a stupid joke. Well, it's not really a joke, but I was gonna say I haven't read that book, but I know that Mike has because he put it on Instagram, I think, or something. I saw it. As close as I got to doing research.
I finished it this week, oddly enough. So
I sent him a message when I saw that he read that. I was like, well, I'm like, you are officially hosting tonight's show.
Nobody likes a show off.
Hey, I've just been doing research. I wanted to show up.
No, I'm disappointed.
You did a great job.
I mean, Jarrod knows that I always feel highly unprepared for these.
And I tell you every time you're the host, you just wrangle conversation.
Yeah, really, Kathy.
I know, but I want to feel smart too.
The host has to know the least about the subject of anybody because they can just be like, and you. Like, I can just point it to someone
Interesting.
Else.
Expand upon that.
Exactly.
But I really do.
Tell us more.
I really do want to read that book because that looked very interesting. So now's the section where Mike tells us all that he learned from this book.
No, because, it's one thing to read a book. It's another thing to retain it. And so
Amen, brother. Amen.
I did learn a lot, though. It is a really good book. It's a comprehensive look. It's sponsored by Granada. And it is revised to include the entire run of the show. And there's not a lot of material on the last sort of shooting of the last part of it, but there's candid and really in-depth interviews with Jeremy Brett, with both producers of the series, as well as both actors that plays Watson. If you're wondering why David Burke left and Edward Hardwick came in, they explain that as well. They do, there's some articles about what the landscape was before this series, as far as the adaptations of Holmes, how many of those were on TV, it's stuff like that. It's really, really a great book, really in depth, and it's got some beautiful pictures in it. So I definitely recommend it.
Just as a follow-up question, if my memory is correct, and you can square me away if not, didn't Burke leave because he and his wife got on with the Royal Shakespeare Company?
Yes. Well, I think she was already there, but then he got on and he was like, I get to work with her. So yeah, bye.
Right.
Yeah. So, I mean, there's debate as to whether or not, there's always going to be that debate about which ones, people like better. But I like the fact that it happened when it did.
Yes.
Oh, absolutely.
3 years pass and then we get Edward Hardwick and it just seems to fit more. Like it just seems to be more comfortable. But
I didn't think I was going to be able to get over Burke leaving, but I've really enjoyed Hardwick too. So
I don't remember it happening at the time. I don't remember going, oh my God, it's a different Watson or whatever. And a lot of people just can't really tell them apart, which is, I think could be insulting, but I think it's a credit to both of them because they're both so good in the role that it just feels like the same person.
Mm-hmm.
Or it could just be that Jeremy Brett just overshadows everybody. And it doesn't matter. So one change that was in the story that they made in this, and I don't know why, if it was logistical reasons because they couldn't get him or whatever, but in the actual story, it's Lestrade that is the inspector instead of Bradstreet. I don't know why they did that, but in some ways, Lestrade seems like he wouldn't be able to be as competent for this story. So maybe I don't know, but in any case, that was like the biggest change, I think, from the story that I noticed.
Yeah, I feel like with Lestrade, there always has to be competition between them more so than with anybody else. So maybe they didn't want to play that up.
I mean, but he seems really competent and he seems like he's just wanting to get his man. Also in the book, it explains that Oberstein is sentenced to 15 years in prison for this offense. And I felt like that was a light sentence. I mean, for what he does, I can't imagine him. I'm surprised they ever let him out.
Yeah, like stealing plans and killing people.
Yeah.
Like, what? Okay.
Yeah.
And hey, at the end of this one, didn't the dude's brother, the guy who stole the plans, didn't he like get away?
Yeah, well,
but Bradstreet was like, let him get away to kind of.
We got him.
We're going to keep an eye on this guy. But.
Yeah. I don't think that was a guy. It was a huge flight risk. I think he was.
Yeah. He definitely played it well too. That he was definitely one of those characters that like learned his lesson. He would never get involved in anything like this ever again. I don't think this was his bag at all. Kathy, you might like this one too, because we did mention how Mycroft, who forgets nothing, couldn't remember Watson's name, which was kind of funny. And it made me wonder if that's what begat the ongoing joke in the Cumberbatch Sherlock, where Sherlock can never remember Lestrade's name.
Maybe.
Watson always has to remind, I think his name is Greg in that show. He's like, always has to remind him. And I thought, I wonder if that's where that little bit sparks from. I just couldn't help but wonder. But I knew you liked that show, Kathy, and so I thought I'd toss that in there.
I do. Well, no, I was going to say, back to Mike reading that book, maybe that's something we should consider once we're done with all the episodes. We read the book and have a kind of a...
Oh, yeah, like a behind-the-scenes episode. Yeah.
Yeah,
like
where we kind of talk about the whole... I love commentary tracks.
It's not a bad idea. And we know a guy who's read it already. He didn't retain it, but he read it.
Well, I barely...
read it again.
How many times have I watched these episodes and I'm still sitting here going, I don't remember anything else about this episode. I'm old, people.
Well, I think with that, unless there's anything else, we're going to have to do some pipe ratings, Kathy.
All right. Well, what did we think of this episode, gentlemen? As a reminder, we have a system in place that helps us rate each episode. On a scale of 1 to 5 pipes, 5, you loved it. It solved your mystery.
Aha!
4, it was really good. 3, it was all right.
Okay.
2, you did not like it. And 1, you hated it. It threw you off of Reichenbach Falls. How would you rate this story, gentlemen? Mike, let's hear your rating.
I am going to go with a very full 4 pipe. This one is pretty good. There's not a lot to not like about it. Obviously, the reintroduction of Mycroft is a bonus in this, but I think there's better. This sort of like stolen plan thing, I think, is executed a little bit better twice before now, because I do like Second Stain better and the Naval Treaty a bit better as well. So I don't know if any of them really rank as 5. I do like this story a lot. It's really, really solid, and definitely one of my favorites, going and watching, rewatching, and rewatching. Or smoking, however we do that. With pipes.
Jared, what are your thoughts on this episode?
Once again, I'm going to join Mike with a 4 solid pipes. I didn't mention this in highs or lows, but the one thing I do feel like happens in this episode is I like it when the episode is like, aha, solved, credits. And here it was like, aha, solved, set a trap, catch the guy, credits. Like, okay, like we figured it out. It just had like this extra piece on the end of it. And I feel like if it had more of that punch, like the last time he solved a missing plans thing, it was letters, I think the letters one. He like jumps, he solved it in like freeze frames, like it's the end of an 80s movie.
Forgot that.
Right? And that was great. That
just like Judd Nelson.
Yeah, like Judd Nelson. Exactly. So, anyways, I said a lot to give this 4 full pipes, just like my friend Mike. What about you, Kathy?
I am going to join y'all on 4 Island. I'm going to give it 4 pipes as well. I did not take as many notes on this episode, but I've assumed that's because I was enjoying this episode more. I was more engaged. For me, I know you said you thought the other 2 paper episodes were better. I guess maybe I preferred this one because the train aspect. I love trains, bucket list. I want to take a big train trip. I love the atmosphere on this one. I love foggy, cold, rainy weather. It just felt a little more atmospheric. The Second Stain one, that one was it was too simple for me. This one had a little bit more going for it. I definitely feel this is a 4. Any other thoughts on the episode? All right, now that we have rated this episode, let's hear some final thoughts from Vincent Price on the episode, The Bruce Partington Plans.
Sherlock's brother, Mycroft, appears in only 2 of the Conan Doyle stories. He is 7 years older than Sherlock, and we learned in the Greek Interpreter that he audits the books in some department of the British government. Though from the way his younger brother speaks of him, it would seem that Mycroft occasionally is the British government. Sherlock also admits that Mycroft has even better powers of observation and deduction than himself, but the great detective adds Mycroft has no ambition and no energy, and would rather be considered wrong than take the trouble to prove himself right. Well, in that sense, the brothers are certainly not alike. Even though Conan Doyle limited his appearances, Mycroft does pop up in novels by others, including Ray Walsh's The Mycroft Memoranda and Enter the Lion by Michael Hodel and Sean Wright. Mycroft fans may be glad to know that in many of these novels, even if Sherlock appears, it's only as a very minor character. Until next time, I'm Vincent Price. Good night.
Now, before we ride off in our handsome cab for this episode, let's thank the Crusaders Club members who help pay the rent here at 221B. These are the fine folks who have joined our crusade. They enjoy exclusive access to special long box episodes. They get to vote to determine show content. They get priority seating to be guests on shows and so much more. Here are the folks reaping the benefits and giving some much appreciated support to the show.
Alan Wright,
Angelica Wolf,
Auburn Elvis,
Bill Breer,
Bill Dunleavy,
Braxton Underwood,
Captain Entropy,
Clark Westfield,
Clint Robinson,
Dave Collins,
Ezra Gallo,
Gary Viola,
Gene Hendricks,
Gerald Green,
Heinz K,
Jason Keene,
Jason Lady,
Jeff Pullier,
Jeremy L.,
Jim Jarman, Jim Jarman, Jim Jarman, Jim Jarman. I hope you like Jim Jarman too.
Jim Neal,
Joe Thomas,
Dr. John Watson,
Josh Strickland,
Candace Ward,
hey, Kathy Bright, the MVP. That's me.
Mark Ross, aka Cluck Trent,
Matt and Lissy Poiso,
Maxwell Traver,
Miranda W,
PD Devons,
Paul Hicks,
Rick from Jeff and Rick Present,
Rob Morgan,
Samantha Maney,
Sean Urbanski,
Spidey 67,
Spreadsheet,
Steve Cronin,
Tim Price,
Tony Pennington.
and the Toronto Cop. Of course, if we miss anyone on our list, we apologize. Keep in mind, we record these episodes well in advance of release. So if you're a recent edition, we should be adding you soon. But still, no worries. Just let us know we missed you by sending an email to contact@longboxcrusade.com. We will get it straightened out. Take your email. We put it in a safe. Requires 2 keys. There's a key to the door. There's a whole, trust me. As a reminder, you can become a Crusaders Club member by heading over to patreon.com/longboxcrusade. For as little as $1 a month, you get access to the amazing world of Crusaders Club. Come check it out. Offer not available in all areas, especially for Jason.
That will wrap up another LBC Irregulars and these 2 Sherlock Holmes stories. We'd love to hear from you if you're familiar with any variation of Sherlock Holmes, including the Granada adaptations. You can find Longbox on X, Twitter, Facebook, Instagram, and YouTube at LONGBOX CRUSADE. Our email, contact@longboxcrusade.com. We can also be reached by phone. That number, 707-532-5269, 707-532-LBOX.
Sell us your plans. And if you want to chat with me personally, I can be found at Yard Sale Artist. That's X, Facebook, Instagram. It's all at Yard Sale Artist. You can check out my artwares, which do include Sherlock Holmes book page sketches, at www.theyardsaleartist.com. Kathleen.
I can be found on all social media at AUKathy2418, and that's Kathy with a K. Mike, where can they find you?
They can find me online. You can check out my various projects, links to my various social media platforms. You can do that all on, if you just go to newlegendmike.com, that takes you to my link tree and can check out all the stuff that I've been working on.
He fancy.
I just wanted to say I appreciate the invite. It's been a lot of fun. Thank you guys so much. This has been amazing.
Oh, you've been great. And I just want to plug Mike's creator-owned comic, Tiki Zombie. It is a blast. And if you haven't checked it out, you should do that. He does a lot of other stuff. Go to newlegendmike.com. But I personally can attest to the Tiki Zombie book. It's a lot of fun.
If you ever see a man running around a convention in a tiki hat and a Hawaiian shirt, that would be Mike.
Well, the odds are good.
The odds are pretty good.
It's not called a tiki hat. It's called a fez, right?
Yes.
Okay, there we go.
No fezzes were included and harmed in this 2-parter that we reviewed today. So I appreciate that as well. Thank you guys so much. It's been fun.
All right. Be sure to join us next quarter as we finish up season 4 of the Granada series with the movie that started it all for most Sherlock Holmes fans, the one and only Hound of the Baskervilles.
Ooh.
We hope to have a surprise guest you don't want to miss. See you next time. Bye.
It's Vincent Price.
Whoa, Vincent Price.
That's what I guess. Bye.
Bye.
Outtakes. You're what's called, we call it a swatty. Show up and do it. SUADI, swatty. Show up and do it.
That's 707-532 LONGBOX.
LONGBOX.
What'd I say? Oh.